All right. Well, speaking of school, we are in school. So, where we left off with the last class, because we didn't have Sunday school last class because it was basically a snow day for us. No one really showed up, so we kind of hung out with Gary's class, which looked pretty interesting. And they're talking about the Truth Project. So as sad as I am that I won't be able to watch more of that, I'm happy to be back with you guys again, talking about transitional fossils. I don't know. I'll just kind of go over this slide. This is the last slide we did, so just kind of get a running start on where we left off. I figured I'd do it again. But a transitional fossil is supposedly a fossil that shows intermediate states between species. So for those that weren't here 2 weeks ago, we're discussing evolution, so the theory of evolution, that is, and the evidence that evolutionary theorists give for evolution. And you're probably already going to come up with, well, how does that really make sense if this? You'll probably have those thoughts in your heads as I go through it. But as we get closer to the end of today's presentation, we're going to talk about the actual challenges to evolutionary theory brought by intelligent design and creation science. But anyway, a transitional fossil, like I said, is a fossil that shows intermediate states between species. And what's important to note about a transitional fossil is that they have to appear in the fossil record at the expected time. So the fossil record is just all the fossils that we've essentially dredged up from the various layers of the Earth that supposedly correlate to different times in our geological history. So obviously ones that are deeper down are going to be older. You see different kinds of life forms depending on how deep you go, and that's what it means that it has to appear in the fossil record at the expected time. So if we're going by the theory of evolution, the idea is that we start very simple, right? And if we're going to go back to the very first one, hypothetically, they haven't found the first, organism ever. But in theory, what it's supposed to be is a very simple organism, like a single cell, basically a bacterium, that then proliferated. It divided into all these different other life forms, and that's where you get the diversity of life that you see today, and that's represented in the fossil record, according to them. And so what you would need, of course, for this, if you're going to have it start as a bacterium, and then it goes into fish, plants, mammals, all these different divisions of life, you're going to have these forkings of life, right? So where you're going to have a transition from a bacterium into a jellyfish, right? There's going to have to be some sort of transitory animal or life creature that would represent that transition. And so that's kind of what they're making the case with these transitional fossils. That's precisely what this is. Okay, so some of the examples that we gave were Tiktaalik rosea. I'm going to totally botch these these Latin words, but Ryan, your kids that are learning Latin now are going to do really good with these words. So Archaeopteryx is a dinosaur to bird transition. Ambulocetus is a land animal to whale. So that's a land animal to a whale. So that's kind of the exception, right? Typically, you see sea creatures to land creatures. That's usually the trajectory it takes. But there is supposedly, I don't know why they think this, but it goes from land animal to whale. Probably because they're mammals, right? That's probably part of it. I don't think there's that many mammals that are sea creatures, exclusively sea creatures, where they kind of have fish-like features. But anyway, that's kind of, so you can see how Tiktaalik rosea kind of looks like it would be, some sort of transition from sea creature to land creature. It's got like a fin going on in the back. It's got some legs. And I don't know if they can really discern much more of the anatomy in terms of whether or not they had gills and those kinds of things. They probably can't, because I think it's their skeletal structure that they're looking at. But that's kind of what they make the case. So they have to appear in the fossil record at the right time. So obviously, if we're going to say that these are the life or organisms that we're going from being sea creatures to land creatures, there can't be land creatures yet, like exclusively land creatures. It has to be in the fossil record prior to land creatures, right? And so that's that. And so they make the case that Tiktaalik rosea, when you look at it in the fossil record, it shows up before exclusive land creatures. So that's what they mean by it has to appear in the fossil record at the right time in the right place. So anything else that... I think that covers that one. Okay, so evidence from biogeography. So something that you might notice as we go through a lot of these slides is that they don't really negate intelligent design or creation. They're just making a case that's consistent with evolution. And so as I was going through this, I'm like, well, how does this really disprove creation? And a lot of times it doesn't. So, you can think of if God did it that way, that's how we did it. But they're showing that you can use purely hypothetically, you can use purely natural processes to have this end result. And so that's and this is the big one that the evidence from biogeography, I'm like, how in any way does this disprove creation? And it really doesn't. But it just shows that it's consistent with evolutionary theory is mostly what's going on here. So it's the study of distribution of species on the Earth, so you probably can't see, but in this picture I have here, it's all the different characteristic animals of each part of the world. So, in the North America region, you have moose and buffalo and foxes, and then in Africa, you have lions and hippopotamus and elephants. In Australia, you got kangaroos. So, all these different animals that you wouldn't see in different parts of the world. So that's biogeography. So life in different, areas or different locations on Earth. And so there's two key topics that they use when they're talking about biogeography, which is convergent evolution and distribution of species on islands. And so we're going to talk about that. Any questions? I always like to do that. Just if there are any questions, we can discuss them. Makes sense so far? Yeah, transitional fossils. Yeah.
The theory, the fact that they need to appear at the different layers in the fossil record, is that a thing that evolutionary scientists say, or is that something that creation scientists say?
I think that's a point of agreement for both of them. Yeah, because
something that creation scientists just say that.
Well, yeah. So if it didn't show up in the fossil record at the right time, that would be a major argument for the creation scientists. You're bringing up this this fossil. Yeah, but I think that they're pretty consistent on that. Even the evolutionary scientists. So, cool. So let's talk about convergent evolution first. And so you'll see I have a cactus and a euphorbia there. I didn't know what a euphorbia was. I probably would have called it a cactus, actually. That's correction, Mike. Those are two cactuses. So different species adapt similarly due to similar environmental pressures. So this is kind of, according to their theory, this is the idea. So they're going to adapt similar due to similar environmental pressures. And so you can have, believe it or not, the euphorb on the left is not closely related genetically to a cactus, even though it looks very, very similar, right? So they both have spines, they both are fleshy, they have fleshy leaves, they both store water, so they have a lot of these very similar features. But they're not closely related, and they say that this actually, in my way, I'm like, well, that doesn't really make sense, because don't they really try to go by mutation is what slowly, evolves one thing into another? Well, there's this natural selection, right? So that if something is only adapted to one particular environment, then it's probably going to have only those features that would be appropriate for that environment. So, however this started, euphorbs, for example, which exist mostly in Asia, Africa, and Australia, I think. Arid regions. So as we know, Australia is extremely arid, mostly desert. And so it's going to have a very, very similar environment to, say, our desert in the southwest region of the United States. And so we don't know exactly what the very primitive versions of these plants were like, but over time they evolved into these fleshy, water storing bodies because of the environment around them. And so slowly they've mutated into these body plans that are actually very similar because of their environments, and they say that evolutionary theory predicts that. Any questions on that? Does that sound? So again, this does not. So just to frame it from the creationist perspective, God could have put similar things in similar environments because God designed the environment, and so He also designed, the life forms in the environments, and so it doesn't negate, creation in any way. They're just trying to show the consistency with their theory.
But they could say the cactus in Arizona came from plant A, ended up looking the same as the euphorbia in Australia from plant B, but they both turned out the same because they're in deserts.
Right. That's basically what they're saying. So, what I mean by distantly related, so they both still have a common ancestor, like apparently we have a common ancestor with the cactus and the euphorbs, right? If you go far enough back. So I don't know exactly how far back it goes. So they kind of diverged, but they kind of came back because of their, environmental, conditions. So, what else? Okay, so distribution of species on islands. So this is kind of another one. Again, it's just showing that an undirected natural process can have a result, that's predictable based on evolutionary theory. So that's what's going on here. So you have continental islands and you have oceanic islands, and that's kind of where we're going to go with this little fact for now. The continental islands were once connected to a continent, and then they were separated due to some sort of plate tectonics, an earthquake or whatever, slowly kind of moved a certain part of land. So say it was on Europe at one time, and then it just slowly went off. I think the British Isles were the example that the book gave. And what's interesting about continental islands that were once connected to the mainland is that you see very similar species on the islands as you would on the mainland. And that includes mammals and reptiles that couldn't swim across, the channel that separates them. Oceanic islands are a little different because they were never part of a continental body. They were never part of any kind of mainland. And so the life that you find on oceanic islands is a little different, right? So you'll see certain life that is similar to the closest mainland. So plant life will be similar. Insects and birds will all be similar because they can transport themselves over. Especially if it's close enough to a particular mainland. Hawaii is kind of an interesting one because it's so remote. There's literally nothing around. It's just right in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But even there are birds and plant life that have made it over. But you won't see the native mammals and certain reptiles that you would see on the closest mainland. And they say this is predictable based on evolution because they would have had no way to get there, right? If this is an oceanic island that was never connected to any mainland, there's just no way for a mammal outside of some sort of artificial means of transportation to actually get there. So they kind of use that as another example that evolutionary theory would predict this. Again, this does not negate, especially if you have an old Earth understanding of reality or origin of the universe. God could have created all these animals before Hawaii was there, and so they would still have to take the time and effort to get over there. It's not like God created everything all at once. If you're a young Earth creationist, that's what you would believe. Hawaii's always been there. All these other islands have always been there, and we're gonna have to figure out another way as to why there's a difference between what's on Hawaii as opposed to what's on some of the other continents.
So is there actual evidence? I mean, do they teach that in school that the continents were together?
Pangea, right?
And then moved apart. Is there actual scientific?
I think they're just using plate tectonics, and anytime that you're talking about that kind of remote history, it's a matter of.
They're just looking at it now and then just saying, oh, this happens now. That's probably.
Right. I think they might have some evidence like that. For example, I think the Himalaya mountains are growing.
Ranges line up too.
Okay.
Right. With the plates, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and the continents that are near it. It's been a long time since I looked.
I've studied this.
But yeah, that was my understanding. Was they kind of do fit together if you look at the continents.
Yeah, and
I don't see how it just
fossils too, like this.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
say it again.
I think if you look at the animal fossils too, kind of like on the England versus like that wasn't like the same animal on the edge of one.
Okay.
Right. I don't think they found like one fossil that was split.
Right. So yeah, I think they have. It's never going to be. They're making a circumstantial case anytime they're making that. There's always going to be an assumption there, but we're kind of like stacking up the evidence. Which evidence is better, I guess. So that's just where you get that rift between old earthers and young earthers, where some will say the evidence is overwhelming, and so they'll concede that it's an old earth, and there's others that will say that really Scripture is very clear that it's a young earth, and they'll kind of go that way. But right now we're kind of making the concession, okay, let's just say it is an old Earth. And that's kind of what we're going with right now, because to even talk about evolution, we have to make that concession. Of course, you don't have to believe in evolution. That's, not, but we're kind of just toying around with the idea, so we can at least see where they're coming from. Okay, so evidence from vestigial traits. Anyone know what a vestigial trait is? Is that a familiar term to anyone? So.
I think I've heard the word, but I can't say define it.
Okay, yeah. It's
like something like your appendix.
Right. What? So.
Oh, yeah.
It's like we don't know what it does, or some will actually go so far as to say it's completely non-functional, like there is no function to it. And so it's basically something. And if we're putting it in the context of evolutionary theory, it's something that once had a function that we've adapted out of. Right? The appendix was once useful. when we were eating raw meat, for example, and we needed it to digest that. I don't know if that's exactly what they proposed, but it once had a function. We've evolved to a certain point. It no longer has a function. It will probably go away at a certain point, right? And so they look to certain animals that have, and us too, as having these vestigial traits, and they say that this is, evidence for evolution, right? So there's another way that we can think about vestigial traits. So it's not necessarily that it's completely lost its function. Maybe the function was repurposed, and so that's kind of what the ostrich is, right? It's because the ostrich has wings, doesn't fly. So why does it need wings, right? So because it does use its wings for balance, but that doesn't seem like it really matches in terms of function. Why would you need wings for that? You could just have any kind of appendage to balance yourself, right? And so what they say is that this was once a flying bird that is now in the process of becoming it isn't a flying bird, and eventually the feathers and all that will probably just go away entirely. So the complexity seems excessive for its function. Anything else I want to say in there? So evolutionary theory says that new traits adapt from previous traits that may not be perfectly suited to function, right? So, which is what you would expect, because if you're in the process of transitioning from one to the other, that transition period, it's not going to be perfectly suited to function. Only when you arrive at that end point will it be perfectly suited to function. Evolutionary theory is everything's always in flux, so no one is ever perfectly suited to function according to them. So other examples of vestigial traits that they give are the tailbone, right? They'll say that this was once a tail, and it's now in the process of becoming, completely going away. What's interesting about the tailbone, though, is that it does have a function. Muscles connect to the tailbone, and if you don't have a tailbone, that's you're going to lose certain muscular functions, right? It seems interesting to me that they propose that that's a vestigial organ. There's also wisdom teeth. So wisdom teeth, they say, is a vestigial organ. Of course, I'm trying to think of do creation scientists give a response to that? It could just be, for the appendix and the tailbone, definitely. Wisdom teeth, I don't know. Who knows why God put them there? But I know with the appendix, I think some research has been done where they found that it actually could have some immunosupport type function, where it actually does boost your immunity, even if it's ever so slightly. So if you take it away, it's reducing your immune function. Now, I lost my appendix 15 years ago at this point, so I haven't noticed any limited immune function, but I guess I don't know if you'd actually be able to tell. But supposedly they found that it does have some level of function with regard to the immune system. Atavisms. Okay, so this is only whether these exist or not is is dubious. So we have sporadic I guess I only have two. So sporadic reappearances of an ancestral trait. So there's a lot of assumptions going on here with this definition. Okay, first of all is that we have ancestral traits. Okay, you can only say that it's an ancestral trait if you assume evolutionary theory is true. Right? Otherwise, there is no such thing as an ancestral trait, because we didn't actually evolve. We don't have ancestors that we evolved out of, right? That we would have genetic differences from, at least not on the species level, right? So I have when you type in atavisms, this is the picture that comes up everywhere, because they use this as their kind of case in point for an atavism. Which what seems to be going on there, when you look closely at the picture, I think that the darkness on his upper torso and arm is hair. It's this black hair, and so anyone have any ideas where they're going with that?
It's he's an ape. Fur from
Right. So this is they're exactly like Caroline and Kelly said. They're drawing this connection. Well, we know that we're so genetically similar to apes that this is a deeply embedded gene that's just become active. That's still in our DNA, but all of these what's called junk DNA. There's all this DNA that we've kind of evolved out of has suddenly been sporadically reignited, and it's being made manifest on this kid's skin, right? Or it's just an abnormality. That's the alternative, right? It's just that you could have, we know that we live in a fallen world. There's imperfections all over the place. And the fact that you could have somewhere in the genetic sequence, you could have an abnormality where something is just a misfire, and you end up with this type of condition. There's so many conditions like that. We're going to talk about various mutations that, that cause cystic fibrosis, that cause color blindness. These are, I wouldn't necessarily say that those are, reemergences of some sort of trait. Obviously, they're not. They harm us. And so this could just be a somewhat neutral. It's not necessarily harming this kid, other than, it's, I'm sure it's not. It's probably annoying, and I'm sure he's self-conscious about it because right. But as far as his function, he's okay. But I don't know that I would necessarily put it in another category as opposed to any other abnormality that actually does cause harm to an individual. So okay. So evidence from pseudogenes. This kind of is in the same camp as the last one. So DNA sequences that are similar to normal genes, but they're believed to be non-functional. So the example of this is the pseudogene GLO. So what they mean by pseudogene is that it actually, real GLO has a function, right, which is to produce vitamin C. Now, can we produce our own vitamin C? We have to consume it, right? So when we have to consume like oranges or lemons or whatever we take in, because we can't produce it ourselves, we have to get it from external sources, right? And it's because we don't have real gene GLO. We have pseudogene GLO, which is a useless gene because it doesn't actually produce vitamin C. But there are other animals that have this pseudogene, and they're part of the same animal kingdom that evolutionary theorists say that we're part of, primates, right? And so they see this common trait that are among primates and humans, and they say, well, obviously we've descended from primates because we also have pseudogene GLO. So again, they're using this to make their case that we've evolved out of these other creatures, which again, like I've been kind of saying a number of times, or we just both have that same pseudogene, not necessarily because we evolved out of each other, but it's just part of our same genetic makeup. It's think about how many blueprints call for doorknobs, but doesn't mean they evolved out of each other. It's just there's buildings need doorknobs, and so similarly, you find similar traits in different animals different creatures because that's how God designed them. It's not really a case against creation. It's just a case to show that their case is somewhat consistent. Okay. So what are the major challenges to evolution? So this is the fun part, right? This is where we get to pick apart everything that they just said. So we have limited transitional fossils. So that should ring a bell because that was where we started today. We have the Cambrian explosion, which is fun. I can't wait to talk about that one. Yeah. So that's to me that's one of the biggest problems for evolution.
I don't know how you can look at that and not think, how did that, it didn't evolve.
Right. It defies all of their expectations. So we'll definitely get to that today. Yeah. Wow, we got a lot of time left. I'm not used to going this fast. Limited junk DNA. So we kind of touched upon junk DNA a little bit. That's what atavisms kind of supposedly come from. Harmful or neutral nature of mutations. Kind of talked about that a little bit. Challenges from natural selection and challenges from the origins of life. That's the other really big one that is a problem for evolutionary theory. So we're hopefully going to get through all that today. So limited transitional fossils. Any questions on anything that I've covered so far? We're doing pretty good.
Go back to the atavism case.
Atavisms.
Did the king grow up in here?
Did the what?
You said every picture was of this.
Yeah,
is there the end of the story?
Oh, I don't know. That'd be interesting.
Is he like a 38-year-old guy right now, or?
I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how old the picture is. I didn't follow up on it, but that would be interesting to know. Are you thinking that maybe it went away, or or he became an ape, or yeah?
I'm guessing he didn't.
Yeah.
It's the only one of that. It's funny that every picture is this.
It's I think. Well, so most of them are artist renderings. Now I don't know if they've actually found other ones. Supposedly I think there was a picture of a human born with what looked like a tail. It was just like a little round thing coming out of the tailbone. Again, is it a tail or is it just an abnormality that happened? Apparently, they may have seen a whale born with legs. But when I was typing in looking for these other features, they were tough to find. This was the one that came up all over the place.
I don't know if he had kids or something.
Did they have fur or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good question though. I'll have to follow up on that.
I've seen pictures of they call it Wookiee boy.
Yeah, they used to do like side shapes.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm thinking of, yeah.
Their whole face and everything is just like beautiful.
Like, right.
It's just their whole, eyebrows are gone, like it's forehead, cheeks, neck.
Right.
But again, there's like that one guy.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of them.
You think with the billions of people that are in the world, you're like, well, there's this community here that just always sees this kind of
Trait arising.
And it's flowing through it.
But it's not. Right. It's a Ripley's Believe It or Not type situation where,
Like,
yeah.
we have one guy, one kid,
Right.
and all the millions of people.
Right. It's just a misfire. I mean, yeah, it's just a genetic abnormality. Honestly, is how I look at that anyway. I don't see it. Sure, it's consistent with their view. Is that the most likely explanation? Probably not. But yeah. All right. So limited transitional fossils. So the fossil record, so we've kind of established already. So fossil record contains organisms that could suggest gradual change. Problem is that it results from arbitrary picking and choosing from millions of fossils, right? So we have lots and lots and lots of fossils to choose from. And so you can imagine with lots and lots and lots of fossils to choose from, you can probably pick and choose. Well, this one kind of looks like a fish. This one kind of looks like it might be a reptile. So let's just say that this went from being a fish to and as long as it arises at the right moment in the fossil record, they can make that case. But again, I think we're not thinking. I think some of us might think that we only have one of these, or just very few fossils to choose from, and so obviously this is what's going on. But if you have millions to choose from, then it's. I mean, think of it today. I mean, we have frogs, we have fish, and we have reptiles, right? So if all life were wiped out and millions of years from now, some species of humans or whatever were to analyze, they'd say, oh look, it's the frog was the transition between the fish and the reptile. So there's like this, I just don't know that it might have been just a unique, manifestation of a creature that wasn't necessarily transitioning from one thing to another. If we're going by the way that, the way that we believe, and any Christian really, if we're going by the creation account, God brought them into existence. And so this wasn't something that necessarily transitioned from one thing to another. This was just a unique creature that God brought into existence, at this particular time in Earth's geological history. So that's really, it's not really a slam dunk for them. It's just they're building a narrative, put it that way, by choosing these particular fossils as and.
It's very similar to the kid. I mean, like you said, we live in a fallen world. Animals have mutations and abnormalities too.
Right.
But they've just found fossils with very similar to humans that 1 in a million has legs and a tail.
And yeah, it wasn't necessarily a transition of any kind.
This narrative behind it to explain their point of view.
Right.
One toe.
Yeah,
Wait, what's that?
Look, the rabbit that our two rabbits had has like one toe on its one foot.
Oh, just one toe?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. So, I mean, yeah, it's just there's all sorts of abnormalities all the time. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going from being one. It's not like it's going to a single toed species or something like that. That's yeah, so you can play the evolutionary theorists. That might be fun.
It's a lucky rabbit.
That's right.
We cited an advantage for it to sell it.
Wait, what's that?
I need some advantage to it to sell it.
That's yeah, I guess. Maybe the advantage of one toe. Could be. Or maybe it's like an ancient thing. Maybe it's not really a rabbit yet. Maybe it's transitioning from something else to being a rabbit. It hasn't fully mutated yet. I don't know. So you can name it.
I remember going, somewhere in elementary school, and they had all this stuff out there, and there was like the two-headed turtle skeleton.
Interesting.
And everybody was like, whoa, like this is so crazy. And then I think they had like a preserved body of a two-headed one. And you're like, well, okay, so that was it was a twin, and it didn't form.
Right, like a Siamese twin type thing.
Siamese twins kind of.
Right. Yeah, you could. Happens in our.
Such weird stuff happens.
Yeah, I mean, abnormalities happen all the time with reproduction. It's.
Joint twins that are connected to the head. Like, well, this is a transitional for, what?
To the two-headed human, or
Definitely not.
Right, right. Yeah. So it's very easy to show that scientifically, if we're looking objectively, there's a lot of holes with this, right? Is that really it really is just a narrative. It's not real scientific evidence that this is definitely evolution. It's just consistent with their theory. But of course, their theory is just that. It's not. It's a narrative that they're proposing that supposedly makes the best sense of the origins of life. But if they can't really objectively show that, which this is not, then they don't really have any better of a case than we do with our understanding of the origin of life. This is another interesting fact. So progressions always come from organisms with similar body plans. So you won't see insects going to reptiles or reptiles going to fish, or it's always within their own body plan group. So we're going to talk about the Cambrian explosion in a second, where you have these specific body plans. So you have chordates, which are vertebrates, which is a pretty big group, anything that has a spine, basically. And then you have cnidarians, which are kind of the jellyfish group. So they're invertebrates, they don't have spines. And then you have, arthropods, which kind of have exoskeletons. So they're kind of on the outside of their body. So crustaceans and obviously insects belong to that group. So you won't see it will never go in between those two. It only once you're in that group, it only stays within that group. But of course, if we're all coming from a singular organism, you're going to have to see that at some point. You're going to have to see a cross from. Right. You're going to have to at some point. They're going to have to funnel together, which they have zero evidence of. So actually might as well just move into the next slide because it's the Cambrian explosion. Because this is really like Kelly was saying, is one of the biggest problems for them. So this is over a brief period of 20 to 40 million years, depending on the books you look at, because I'm reading another intelligent design book now. Some of them limit it to 5 to 10 million years, so I'm not exactly sure who's got the right number, but it's a relatively brief geological period of time. So in terms of science, that's really not that long. When you're going 3.5 billion years, apparently, was supposedly when the first life emerged on the world. I don't know how they get that number because they haven't found it, but I guess they're just surmising based on the level of development at a certain point. But so it's over a brief 20 to 40 million a year period that most of the body plans appear in the fossil record. And this has happened 570 million years ago to 530 million years ago, based on the depth in the fossil record. So that's how they're calculating that number. What was I going to say? So what I mean by major body plans is what I just said. So we have arthropods, chordates meaning vertebrates, and cnidarians meaning jellyfish. So all of those arise over this very brief period all at once. There's just 20 to 40 million years is not nearly enough time that you would need in order to get that kind of divergence. You need far longer length of time in order to get that. So, and then before this time, all you have are single-celled organisms with a few multicellular organisms, but really not much. Life is extremely simple. And again, I'm pulling from a different book at this point, but I think there was maybe some certain simple plant life. I think you might have started to see some sort of primitive jellyfish at this time, but this isn't the few 100 million years leading up to the Cambrian explosion. But certainly no vertebrates, certainly no any kind of insect. You're not seeing anything like that. So there's just this massive proliferation of life going on over this very short period of time. So pre-Cambrian fossils are too different from Cambrian fossils to show any ancestor-descendant relationship. That's kind of what I was saying before. So if we're going to have vertebrates, how do you get from a sponge to a vertebrate? Or how do you get from a jellyfish to a vertebrate? And they have no examples.
Transitional fossils between there.
No, there's no transitional fossils between those. And so that's a major problem for their theory.
There was a graphic I remember, and again, this is from college, but I remember them showing this graphic, and it's a timeline of if our dating is correct on the fossils that we've discovered over the course of our entire history. And it's the timeline goes nothing, no fossils are found, or maybe one or two, and then all of a sudden you hit one point on the timeline and everything is there. And it's to me, I look at that and it's oh my gosh,
it's creation.
You are incredible, God.
Yeah.
How do you not see that and think somebody made all of these things all at one time? To me, it's amazing to see. It's just a timeline, and then all of a sudden, all of these creatures that they've discovered are all in that one time period. It's just so cool.
It's amazing, isn't it? Well, and of course, Darwin didn't know this back in his day. Like, so this is newer knowledge. This whole Cambrian explosion. This has been found with as we've discovered more fossils and we kind of have figured this out. And so to me, I'm like, wow, this kind of is showing how honestly Darwin's theory is somewhat antiquated because you really can't make much sense of this outside of that. Now they do try to rationalize it. I don't think. We're not going to get to that in this course. I am hopefully going to do an actual full-blown intelligent design course at a certain point, so we can get more of the nitty-gritty of it. But yeah, this is just one of the.
When you just look at that, it's like.
Yeah.
I mean, the logical conclusion is that something happened.
Something created it.
Something happened, and you can debate like what was it that happened? But like you look at it, and you're like, how something happened to create all of these creatures in their different forms and their different types and stuff like that, all at one time. Like,
Right.
It's just it's crazy.
It's like you hear about a lot of scientists that start like digging into it and they see this,
Yeah.
and then they end up converting and
Yes.
saying there's no other explanation.
There's no,
to
that is
But
the
you don't
most
hear a lot
logical
about
explanation.
those
Is
people.
something created those things
Right.
all at one time.
Yeah. Yeah, it couldn't be evolution. Like it couldn't be this because it's not gradual. It's
No, because the reason that they always give for everything is time.
right.
Time. Give it enough time, and the one single cell organism will turn into a zebra and a person, and it's like we don't have any evidence of that.
Right.
That is your whole argument. There is no evidence of that main thing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know and it's funny to watch them rationalize with like something like punctuated equilibrium. That's just a fancy way of saying that like you can have evolution happen over very short periods of time, but they have no evidence for it. So they just create this fancy word to mean something that completely is just utter nonsense. So it's funny to watch that happen. But
even adaptations within a species itself, like yes, that does happen. We've witnessed that, but that doesn't mean that the one I was thinking was some butterfly in Europe that was really colorful and then it got really smoky and so it changed its color to be a little more camouflage or something.
Right.
But it didn't turn into something else.
A cockroach.
Just the
Right.
ones that were a little bit better camouflaging weren't getting eaten. So
right. It's still a butterfly.
it's still a butterfly.
Right.
Yeah.
It didn't change its form into some new kind of creature.
Right. Yeah. So because we talked about this I think 3 weeks ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago, microevolution and macro. Yeah, the birds, right? The Galapagos finches, right? So yeah, what you were describing was microevolution, right? What they're assuming is that macroevolution is possible, that you can have interspecies changes, which has never been demonstrated. So okay, so we did that one. This is also kind of an interesting detail. So Cambrian body plans are distinct, yet they have been stable since the time of their creation. So we've never had really an additional body plan added since this time. They've been robust. 570 to 530 million years ago. It's not. Vertebrates have been around this whole time. Invertebrates have been around this whole time. Insects have been around this whole time. You don't see like additional body plans being added. So you can see, like you were talking about, variation within the species. But I mean, even as you go into I'm like a little foggy on like all the different classifications. You have like the animal kingdom, you have phylum, then you have genus or class, the whole thing down. Really, you never see like this kind of what's interweaving between those different classes. They're stable, and you don't see any more being added since this time. So you'd think, okay, over this 20 to 40 million period, you have this like major explosion of life. Why did it all stop? Why did it, like 530 million years ago, they all just kind of stay the same and they're durable. So it's just kind of an interesting thing to think about. What's that? Yeah, I know. So, and then the last one is that Cambrian animals represent a huge jump in DNA complexity, which this kind of ties into specified complexity, which is more of an intelligent design theory. But let's just kind of talk about this for a moment. So, in order to get from a bacterium, right, which is mostly what life was in the time of the Precambrian era, to get to now, I mean, these animals, like something like this, right? I don't even know what you would call that, like. See, right? What'd you call it? Yeah, is that what it is? That looks like a little. Yeah, that's a familiar sounding word. But obviously, to get from a bacterium to that kind of creature, can you imagine how much more DNA it has to be added? How much has to be how much new information has to be added in order to get to that? And all by an undirected process if we're going by evolutionary theory. And I mean, what you'll find, and I think I might talk about it a little bit, you almost never see new information, especially new beneficial information being added to DNA. You'll see harmful information like being taken away, or neutral things happening, like the kid with the hair. Didn't really harm him necessarily outside of his appearance, but yeah, you hardly ever see beneficial mutations to be having. And for that, you would need millions of them to get from a single cell organism to something like that. You figure all the different organelles, all the organs, all of the body system is just like so much more vastly complex than a single bacteria. So it really is. I don't think evolutionary theorists have a way to explain how you get that level of increased information in that short of a period of time. Because again, the way that they always rationalize it is that you need more time. You only have 20 to 40 million years. That's not nearly enough time to get that level of complexity. So. Yeah, well, Crick, right?
Because they're like, well, it had to come from
somewhere.
So that seems the next logical way.
Right. No God, but aliens. Yes. So. Right.
They have to make some kind of a leap.
There has to be some kind of argument.
They have to explain it somehow.
Okay, wait, we see it, something happened here. So, okay, aliens.
Right.
Aliens brought some magic soup here and seeded the world. And
Yep.
Have they brought up like meteors or anything before it?
What's that?
Have they brought up like
Meteors?
Like a meteor?
I've heard that theory before, yeah, which I think that's maybe how you get that alien life outside of a UFO, I guess. But yeah, who was a famous person who held that view was Francis Crick, who developed the theory of DNA, or the understanding of DNA, the double helix. That was something that he proposed. It was kind of like panspermia something is like that idea. That's the scientific name for alien life, essentially being the origin of our life. But yeah, someone as highly renowned as Francis Crick held that view. Yeah, right. I know.
It couldn't possibly be that the thing that we've all believed in for centuries and centuries that actually is true. It can't possibly be that.
Right. That's.
That aliens were.
That's just it, though. When you're pushed and say, okay, well, I don't believe in God. There's no way that he could have done any of this. These stories that we have are just myths. And there has to be, I have to look somewhere else to find the answer for this, because we can't have that. I can't believe that.
But that's just so ascientific, isn't it?
So,
Yeah.
It's anti-scientific to say that we.
It is.
Yeah, that we can't consider it.
We can't consider that could be the possibility of what happened. So I have to definitely look
Elsewhere, right.
And that's, when you look elsewhere, that's where you're looking. That's
Yeah.
where your mind.
Right, that's when you start to allow things like aliens or just these theories that really don't make any sense to be your best case, I guess. How much time do we got? It's about 9:59 now. Why don't we stop there? And then we'll get into limited junk DNA next week. So, all right. Maybe we'll end with a quick prayer and then we'll head on up. So thank you, Lord, for just bringing us into your house today just to learn about some of these theories that the world is putting out there, and just for giving us your evidence and showing us that really you've given us everything that we need to know. It's evident from the creation. It's evident from your book, from Scripture, and from the revelation that you've given to the prophets and the apostles. And just continue to strengthen us in the faith, and just help us to go forward in our week with that confidence that you are true, and we can have that confidence in you. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.